Hello, everybody!
Turn this up in my headphones, Charles.
Turning it up. Hello, everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy today. Because, Dylan, I feel like, we're back talking Joe Abercrombie, which is great. And The reason we're back is because I feel like we may have done Red Country a little dirty.
Ooh, well, we did get some fan feedback of that nature. I remember, too, at the end of our Red Country episode, it's like we were doing it for hour, 20 minutes, hour and a half. And I was like, it still felt, I remember bringing up, I was like, did we talk about it enough here? And I'm like, yeah, we kind of were like, well, what? We gave it an hour 20, hour 30.
We talked about the main things, but there's so many other things that we could talk about. So we're back. This is a part 2. We are going to wrap up our conversation on Red Country, make sure we cover everything that has happened in this book and share our thoughts on it. Dylan, you want to give a quick spoiler warning before I get into what we're covering today in Red Country?
Yes, so we'll be covering the First Law world up through Red Country. So if you don't want the First Law original trilogy spoiled for you, you don't want Best Served Cold spoiled for you, you don't want the Heroes spoiled for you, and you don't want Red Country spoiled for you, then now is a good time to turn this down in your headphones, because we're going to have a no-holds-barred conversation about Red Country, and that will include these earlier books in the universe.
Yes, that is well said. And today, last time we talked about Lamb, Shy, Temple, and Casca mainly, their full character arc. So if you haven't listened to our first Red Country episode, I recommend going back and listening to that, because that is where we will be talking mostly about them. Today we won't be talking about them as much, so that we can make room for some of these other characters and plot moments that have happened in the story. So let's not delay any longer, Dylan. I guess when it comes to the POV characters, the only ones that we really left out, and I mean left out, we did talk about them a little bit, would be the poor children that were abducted. I know. Ro, who is the sister of Shy. Yeah. And I did mention at the end, I was like, oh man, I want to talk about Ro, and we never made it. So why don't we start there, and then we'll go back through the plot and pick up everyone else. But she is the last POV character that we have to address, I believe, if my notes are accurate. And what's interesting to me about Ro is you never quite know if this is Stockholm Syndrome in her case, because she gets kidnapped by the ghost, which is obviously a bad thing. But by the end of the book, she actually feels like she has a place where she belongs, and she has a father. Is it by the
ghosts, Charles? Or is it by
did I get it wrong?
Yeah. I think she gets kidnapped by
the dragon people. The dragon people.
Well, yeah. Well, she gets kidnapped and delivered to the dragon people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And, that's true. Yes. So it was like You're right. It was like a band of people that were working for the dragon people, and that's like a whole plot in this book that we also didn't address last time. Was the dragon people are
Cantless was who kidnapped her.
Yes.
Cantless and his crew.
So. Yes, thank you for that correction. And so exactly correct. And what's interesting is by the time Ro makes it to the dragon people, she starts to find like a sense of belonging, and she kind of gets put under the wing of Werdenor, I hope I'm saying that correctly, who is the leader of the dragon people, and he's like finding a place for her and explaining like how the dragon people work and what she's now a part of and how he'll protect her and all these other things. And she kind of feels this thing of belonging. And to me, the whole time, and Dylan, I guess I want to hear your thoughts on this, is like, is this Stockholm Syndrome or is this another Joe Abercrombie irony where she's being saved from a situation where she may even be better off?
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of these Joe Abercrombie gray moments, if that makes sense. Like, it's not black or white. I think that the dragon people sincerely believe they are doing what's best. Like, they're taking people from this like meaningless red country world, which is like that's like quote we read a little while back, like in the first episode. It's like the world is kind of messed up out there, and the dragon people are sincerely, it seems like, trying to like bring these children into their, it's like seems like basically a cult, and they are trying to do what's best for these kids, though, I think. Like, and we do see that when Werdener sacrifices himself for Ro. Like, yes. He does care that deeply.
Yes.
So I think, like, is it Stockholm Syndrome? Is not. I mean, my psych perspective is kind of like Stockholm Syndrome is a pop psych thing. It's a real, like, thing that happens to people, but it's not, like, in the DSM, which is the thing we use to diagnose in psychology or anything like that. But is it so I don't know. I don't get too into this. Like, is it Stockholm Syndrome? Is it not? Like, that's more of an idea that. But I think what it is Ro is a child, and children want attention. They want people to show them kindness, show them that they care, and like it's. I don't think it's a good idea to actually have people kidnap children and take them from their homes, obviously. But I think once she's there, she is with someone, with Werdener, who genuinely cares for her enough to even sacrifice his own life and shows her that attention that she's looking for. And I think that connection, whether it's built on, like, I think it's just a messed up thing to kidnap, obviously. It might be built on those, like, weird, messed up foundations, but their connection as individuals, I would say, is very true and genuine.
Right. And it's interesting that, like, once she's, quote, rescued, saved, and I put that in quotes because they're, on their way back home, and she's trying to escape multiple times. She's not happy to see Lamb or Shy, and eventually you feel like there's some hope for her, and she starts to come around. So it almost ends on this hopeful note that we're talking about with Red Country, like, hey, maybe she does, like, she will, learn to, like, be happy with her family, and there's hope for them as a family. But I do enjoy these moments, and it's very Abercrombian of like, oh, I rescued you, which is that good deed, being punished by she's ungrateful and she doesn't want to be there.
Right. I think the hardest part for Ro is the changes, the transitions. Mm-hmm. So once she gets settled, like she's been settled in her life with Lamb and Shy and stuff, and then she's taken from that. And that's, it's a kid getting kidnapped. So it's all over the place, and she's miserable. And the people that take her are really not the best people. They're really messed up people. And there are some moments even where it's implied some folks are considering sexually assaulting her. It doesn't happen, luckily. But there's moments like that, and she's just scared in the changes. But when she's with someone who's showing her care, she feels like secure. And what happened was when Lamb came back, and obviously him trying to kill her doesn't help. She again starts to feel like she's taken away from a home. And it's those transitions that are really scary, I think, for a child. So Ro, I do have hope for her now, because she is at home again with Shy and Temple, who are two, in my opinion, very well-meaning, well-intentioned people who I think are equipped to basically be parental figures for her. And even though, Shy's her sister. And then Lamb, the person who almost killed her and killed the person that she was starting to see as her father, like, is out of the picture. So I actually think he kind of, like, I don't think Ro was ever going to recover from like, I don't think she could ever forgive Lamb, but Lamb's out of there.
Right.
So I actually think she is well equipped to like make some sort of meaning out of this and have a life, hopefully, of the best you can make in a Joe Abercrombie world. So I also share that hope for Ro.
Very well said. Yeah, I share that hope for Ro as well, and I think that's kind of a standout thing about Red Country is it does end on a more explicitly hopeful note than most of Abercrombie's works. So he was able to have that kind of no good deed does unpunished, bitter irony kind of thing with her arc, but to end it hopefully, it's nice, and that's a standout moment for us. So now that we have done justice to Ro, another character that I wanted to make sure we talked about a little bit more was Dab Sweet.
The phrase like "stab sweet erasure" I think was used in a comment that we
and they're not wrong,
which is very funny. They're not wrong. We basically I don't know if we probably offhandedly mentioned him, and he's a very interesting, cool character with this arc surrounding this. I guess it's when you are more myth than man, which is something we sometimes say about Quoth in the King Killer Chronicle.
Sometimes we say it about Lamb.
We do, yes. It's like the idea and the legend that you carry around with you is so much bigger than who you are as a person that it's like you're walking in your own shadow almost. Like how do you live up to this idea people have of you? And it's I think it is the most specific and like well-explored exploration of this concept in all of Abercrombie's work to this point, to like actually dive in with a character and make that their main arc. Like, how do you live? You're right. Logan, it's like a part of the arc, but it's not the number one focus, I would say. It's the number one focus of Dab Sweet's arc.
Right. For Logan, it's almost like an excuse. He's like, I got more scores to settle. But for Dab Sweet, it's more of a actual central part of his arc. And the way he was described, wearing like the raccoon hat and stuff like that, I was picturing like a Davy Crockett type character. For those who aren't maybe as fully aware, Davy Crockett is an actual... Wikipedia even calls him an American folk hero. He was a frontiersman, a soldier, and eventually a politician. But he has this like pop culture story around him as the king of the wild frontier, which brings me back to like what we think of Dab Sweet, and like everyone thinks of him as a hero as well. Shy actually even negotiates like the use of his likeness to sponsor like this bridge, which is also like a sign of the changing times, right? Which is another theme of this book, is like the world is changing, and now intellectual property and sponsorships are becoming more of a thing. So it's interesting to see that take place, but the use of like a Davy Crockett inspiration for this character is rather interesting, because it is this like new frontier hero, and there is something romantic about that. And of course, Abercrombie fashion, he juxtaposes that against some of the more unsavory pieces of Dab Sweet's character. He makes some moves that at the beginning are almost like for lack of a better word here, they're like not degenerative behavior, but he is like taking advantage of people, and he's making arrangements with ghosts to rob the people that have paid him to lead them safely to get them robbed and split the profits with the ghosts, which is like to me, that was like almost like a shocking moment. I'm like, am I reading this correctly? that this is what he's doing? I don't know. I was kind of surprised by those moments.
Yeah, there's a stuff with Sangeet or Sanjeed, whatever his name, right? Like, I think Dab, you don't last this long out on the frontier without a little bit of a morally gray streak, and you basically don't exist in a Joe Abercrombie novel without a little bit of a morally gray streak. Right. So, it's surprising when you think of him as this like big hero, but I guess that's part of the point where it's like, well, you can think all these stories about Dab Sweet, and they're based on a true story. It's kind of that thing like when you see a movie and you see at the beginning opening credits, it'll say based on a true story. And you think, well, what does that even mean? How like how much of this is true? And that's basically Dab Sweet, who his reputation for being an incredible do-gooder at the same time as being a legendary hero. It's just no one's actually like that. So when he starts having these moments you describe, yeah, it can be surprising at first, but then in classic Abercrombie fashion, it's more that people weren't letting the truth get in the way of a good story when it comes to Dab Sweet.
Right. And I can just picture, I've seen like interviews with Abercrombie, and he's done like bookshelf tours and things like that. He has a lot of history books in his collection.
And Westerns.
As well. So I can just picture him like reading a story about Davy Crockett and in his head being like, this is way too romantic of a caricature for an actual person who lived. And like, spun the story in his head.
Gotcha. So you're basically saying that what Abercrombie made Baez into for Gandalf is what he made Dab Sweet into for Davy Crockett.
Pretty much, right.
In reality, this character would not be able to be what everyone is saying about them.
He'd abuse his position, he'd have his faults. But, at the end of the day, he does come through for the team. He does lead that like herd of horses. He stampedes the horses to help Shy escape with the loot. So that was a fun little redemption moment for him. And again, we come back to this hopeful nature of this story, which is that, he was going to rob a few people, but I don't think he intended anyone to get murdered and killed, which is what happened a lot on that expedition. So I think he was genuinely shocked and upset by when the ghosts killed some of their men, and then Lamb killed their leaders. It's like, he was like, what is going on? This is not how we do things out here, So I can see that, he was abusing his position, but he was just trying to get a little extra coin, He wasn't trying to, like, have people get killed or murdered or anything, so... You feel it doesn't make it right, but it's that interesting glimmer into his character that I think makes him one of these like fan favorites where it's like this is erasure of his existence.
Yes.
So, just
yeah.
But we had so much to say about Lamb that he kind of fell to the wayside a bit in the first episode, but now here we are having a full discussion on good old Dab Sweets. And I think we just keep going, go through some plot moments that we may have rushed over, and he'll come back into the conversation as we hit some of these plot points. Unless there's something you want to bring up.
I just want to talk about the end of his arc.
Sure.
The character arc for him, which is this whole time he has been trying to underplay his legacy or complaining about how he can't be who he's supposed to be in all of these legends. And he's always trying to say, oh, yeah, sure, I did kill a bear, but it was a small bear. And it is interesting from this almost imposter syndrome perspective, right? Because at a certain point, then the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think, between what Dab Sweet thinks of himself when he's underplaying himself. It's like that's imposter syndrome. And then the biography that had already been written about him, The Life of Dab Sweet, was supposed to be this full of fantasy and full of Davy Crockett type folklore things. Mm-hmm. And it's if we do step back and we do think about the facts of the situation, it's like, Dab, you did kill a bear.
Yeah.
You freaking killed a bear. Like, yes, it wasn't with your hands, which is what the story starts to say. It wasn't 3 bears or whatever, which is what other people will start to say. It wasn't to save a princess, or not that I think that's necessarily what they say, but I think they do have like to save a woman or whatever. And it's like, yeah, it wasn't all those things, but like, you are a very impressive person, Dab. You did kill a bear, and not a lot of people can say that. So I guess it's just interesting to think of Dab Sweet's arc through this imposter syndrome perspective, especially when at the end of it, it ends with this Sorbrick is getting interested in him. And he's like, I want to help you write the honest story of who you are, because that Life of Dab Sweet biography is overblown. And what Dab says to him is, which makes me wonder, have you heard of the time I killed a great bear with naught but these 2 hands? And it's like, okay, it's interesting that when push comes to shove and he gets a chance to tell his honest story, he's still building himself up some. So I guess that comes from some sort of insecurity that he thinks if the true story gets out there, it would be like people wouldn't respect him as much, and he does want that. But it's like, I don't know, for someone who's always trying to tell his truth, then he gets the chance and he still lies a little bit. Not as much as he could have, but a little bit. So it's like, I don't know. I've just always loved that. It's like this insecurity that Dabsweet clearly feels in this imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's also interesting to think about, you have Swarbrick, right, who was writing Casca's story and then murdered Casca and then decided he was going to write Dabsweet's story. So it's an interesting transition of like Casca was the old famous hero legend of fortune, and now I want to write quote absolutely honest story of the taming and settlement of the far country through Dabsweet. So this idea that the book deal kind of changed and the character of interest kind of changed from a Casca character to a Dabsweet character is an interesting one, because Dabsweet in the end did have some redemptive moments, and he has some elements of humility about him that Casca did not have. And Casca throughout this whole book is obviously a sign of like the changing times. He's like, people like me are like from an older age, a different world, and the world's changing, and he could recognize that. Casca,
yesterday's man was the phrase, which is a really interesting one.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting now that as the times are changing, so was the like narrative in which Swarbrick is choosing to focus on. Granted, he did kill the other guy he was going to write a story on, but still, it was just interesting that Swarbrick made that change, and that Dabsweet actually becomes the person he like has a book deal with. Yeah.
I think that Dabsweet, it's almost makes me think of this Batman type stuff, and I don't know if it's just I won't reveal plot points or anything, but this kind of like hero we need versus hero we deserve type thing. People right, and a lot of people have probably seen those Batman Christopher Nolan movies, but I just won't spoil what that addresses. But for those who have, this idea of people need some sort of folklore hero to believe in, even if they're not actually that person. And if you are Dabsweet and Swarbrick, two people who can kind of, well, Swarbrick's getting bamboozled, I guess. He wants the true story and Dab's not giving it to him. But I guess if you are Dab, there's almost a redemption in letting people have that story about you that inspires them. Instead of making it about you needing to be seen and you needing your honest story to be told. It's like, if that's like stretch of the truth inspires other people to be better and inspires other people to try to be like the idea of you, I guess, like the idea that you are this amazing do-gooder, like letting them have that might actually be the best you can do for the world. And I think that's kind of I don't know if he was thinking about all of that when he decided to give a little bit of a lie there, but I think it's just an interesting thing to consider, that letting people have that image of you that isn't entirely honest might be the better thing for the world at large.
Agreed completely. Yeah. It's one of these plot points that I think is super interesting, and it shows the evolution of Abercrombie's writing and the themes that he's exploring in the First Law. So it's really interesting. When we released the first episode, I had mentioned in like my Twitter announcement that it's been so fascinating to watch Abercrombie's themes that he's exploring in the First Law change and develop over time. And I feel like we really start to see some new ideas coming into the mix and new priorities, new focuses with Abercrombie's themes in this book. And it's these kind of things that I find to be super fascinating. So, a few other plot points that I wanted to make sure we discussed. There's the whole element of when they first enter Crease, and I thought Crease was an interesting place. We did briefly mention the mayor, who we suspect is Carla Dan Eider. Is that actually confirmed?
No, it's not confirmed, but it's heavily implied. And I think it's true, but it's one of those Abercrombie things that he purposefully won't say it,
Right,
but he'll
right.
give you everything but, and
Right,
say,
right.
like, this is for the close readers who've read all the original stuff.
Right.
And you
And
can figure it out and be happy. Like
And
Lamb,
then
even.
Papa
Lamb
Ring,
is
yeah.
Logan, but literally it's never explicitly said that Lamb is Logan. It's more obvious than Carlot as the mayor, but like...
Right. Way more
I think it's the
obvious,
same thing.
but exactly. And I thought that was interesting. My ears perked up the way Costco reacted to the mayor. I was like, oh, okay, this is a character that we should know. So that was fascinating. Papa Ring, I thought, was an interesting character. And this,
I thought so too.
You get this like shanty town, kind of this boom town, I guess you'd call it, that was common in the West, where it was like as people were coming through, they'd set up a town and then abandon it, and like civilization hadn't quite reached them yet. So it's interesting to see the power struggle on, either side of the street here, of this little town.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed was Papa Ring and Glamma Golden versus the Mayor and Lamb. This was such a fun fight, and to have Glamma Golden is interesting. And the fight where he's starting to, like, Golden is starting to realize who he's fighting. That it takes his perspective, his POV, and he's fighting, and all of a sudden he sees like a change in Lamb, and then he's like, "Wait, count the fingers." He's like, "Oh God," and then like fades to black.
He's like looking
and then
at him
like,
through the fingers. Yeah, and he's like, "Oh no."
Yeah, and then it fades to black, and the next scene it's like, "Nice job killing that guy." And
Well, he destroyed. It was almost Bethod like what he did to Lamb's got a pattern, and we know that
his signature moves, his finisher.
Yes, and he definitely. It's a very interesting fight, and that moment is... you just imagine being Glamma Golden, and we know everything that's said about the Bloody Nine, and it's once the Bloody Nine himself comes out, it's all true. Mm-hmm. And it's like, Glamma looks at me and is like, oh no, now my time is up, because there's always someone like stronger, bigger, better out there, and unless you're the Bloody Nine himself, basically. And then, it's this... We're in Glamma's perspective, right? We get like a Glamma Golden perspective, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes.
It's been a few weeks, but And just imagining what it's like to be Glamma looking at his death in front of him in the form of the Bloody Nine is intense. And it's also really cool to see this kind of... I think this is the line that gets brought up a lot of times in the original trilogy, is like, the seeds of the past bear fruit in the present. Mm-hmm. And it's Glamma Golden is only there because of the stuff that Calder and folks like got going with their little conspiracies at the end of the heroes. So it's another moment of like, oh, Glamma had his life torn apart by Calder and all of those, I'm sure, partially bias influenced things going on over there, and now he's here, and now we get this moment that we would never be able to have otherwise, only because Calder ruined Glamma's life. And and it's like seeing Glamma become this going from the golden hair to heroic in his head figure to this reluctant, resigned to his fate of being someone who actually doesn't like fighting but has to, almost like Logan and Shivers have dealt with, is really interesting. And lastly, something that's really interesting is this: I feel like Papa Ring and Glamma Golden were the better people. Not that they're heroes over there, but they were the better people than the mayor and Lamb. Like, Papa Ring's actually honest, if nothing else, and that means I don't know, that's for me like a very...
he is a gangster.
Thing. His word means something, but his word, the Carlot, or the mayor, is savage. Yes. She freaking hanged him, and Papa Rings would not have done that to the mayor, I think. Like, Papa Ring, when we get his perspective, the one thing he does is keep his word, and the mayor doesn't do that. The mayor's savage. And Glamma, I don't know. Glamma, it's hard to say who's a better person between Glamma and Lamb, but Glamma was like, I'm done with this. I'm done fighting. Who knows if that would stick?
Right.
Because we've heard that story before.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
and if he did show mercy, he would have just been taken advantage of, so it's like...
Right.
either way. He was just not a man for this world, unfortunately. Yeah. But it was interesting how it's like, again, it's the Union and the Empire like at odds with each other on a much smaller scale here, because they're both, the mayor's backed by the Union kind of, and then Papa Ring is backed by the Empire. So it's, again, this struggle still is going on in the First Law world, and now it's like reaching into the frontier. So yeah, it's really just wanted to make sure we brought up those points. Nowhere safe. And you do kind of feel sad for Papa Ring.
Petty feud.
Yeah. That
between
like
Bias and Cool.
Which I love.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
it's pettiness.
It's kind of takes a little bit more of a backseat in this book. It's not as direct, but it's still a presence. It's still seeping in a little bit. Its influence is still here.
A bank shows up at the end.
Yes, the bank does arrive.
Yeah.
That's right. So.
Yes. Valent and Bulk. Those definitely two different people and not both Bias, right, Charles?
Yes, most definitely, right? Absolutely. So the other moment that happens in this that I want to make sure we discuss is like the attack on the dragon people, right? Because we have this whole thing with Casca, like Lamb kills Golden, all these things. That's settled. And they eventually figure out that it was the dragon people who were funding these mercenaries to like abduct children to recruit for the dragon people, right? That was part of it. So they decide that they're going to go, and Casca, sniffing an opportunity, decides he's going to go as well. And it's this really interesting thing, right? Because it develops with, we go to the dragon people and they're having this like, it feels like a tribe meeting almost, where they're all sitting around and talking, and it's like, look, we're not confrontational people, we're very isolated, we're trying to keep ourselves secret. And then you have Wardener being like, we have to be ready, we have to do all these things. And then you have Casca roll up with cannons and just eviscerate them. Absolutely eviscerate. Brutal. And again, one of the themes of this book is the changing of the times. And Abercrombie is developing his entire fantasy world to be a Western one, to eventually be in like an industrial one. So this is, again, one of those signs of the time. And I feel like the Ghosts is that, that last bit of hanging on of like the old magic in the world, and it's just getting absolutely eviscerated by cannons.
Yes, that's well said, Charles, and it goes well with the Mark Twain quote that Joe Abercrombie has at the start of, I guess this is section 4 or whatever, called Dragons. And the quote from Mark Twain is, "There are many humorous things in the world, among them the white man's notion that he is less savage than the other savages." And it's very Twain, of course, but it's also very Abercrombie, and to just be like, all people kind of suck. Like, you just have to assume that people in general, like, there's some good eggs or whatever, and everyone's trying their best. But at the end of the day, whatever like society or culture you try to form, people are people, and the things that are tough about that fact, like the bad qualities about people, are going to show up. And it's kind of this, it's easy to, the way the narrative is written, it's easy to place the dragon people as these evil people who are abducting folks. But then you get this moment that you're talking about where it's like, well, the like quote unquote good guys, like the people coming to save the children, are using cannons and eviscerating and murdering and like these other, and you get those point of views of the dragon people, and in their heads, like everyone else, and this Abercrombie has been doing this a lot with point of views, and we'll get into more when we do that like point of view episode down the line on Abercrombie's work. Like everyone is telling themselves a story where they're the hero. Like they're the hero of their own story. And we get that from this jumping of point of views in the dragon people meeting. And we get this moment where it's like, let's save children. Oh, but we need cannons. Like, we need to murder everyone in order to do that. And everyone's got those base human instincts.
It's juxtaposed really well, right? You have Casca's brazen, like, I will use cannons to eviscerate these people and steal all this gold, against the dragon people who have a life like a long history, tradition, culture rooted in like magic. There's an actual dragon that is dormant.
Well, metal dragon.
Yeah.
It's from the Master Maker.
Right, from the Master Maker, right.
Yeah.
But it's mysterious, right? And then the Master Maker was capable of doing some pretty fantastical things, right? So it's this magic thing, and that's based on centuries of tradition and this whole way of life that just immediately gets barreled over. And I have a good quote as well. I believe it's Casca talking to Wardenor, and Dylan, feel free to interrupt me to correct me, but this is again this idea of the changing of the times, and I believe it happens like he uses the cannons to eviscerate them, and then Casca's like, right before, or maybe it's not Wardenor, I can't remember, but it's somewhere along the dragon people, and he says, it's a bit of a long quote, so bear with me, and then Dylan, feel free to interrupt me. But Casca smiled up at the dragon, hands on his hips. It's certainly a remarkable curiosity, a magnificent relic, but against what is already boiling across the plains, the legion of the dumb, the merchants and farmers and makers of trifles and filers of papers, the infinite tide of greedy little people, he waved his hat towards the dragon. Such things as this are worthless as a cow against a swarm of ants. There will be no place in the world to come for the magical, the mysterious, the strange. They will come to your sacred places and build tailor shops, a dry goods emporia, and lawyers' offices. They will make of them bland copies of everywhere else. The old mercenary scratched thoughtfully at his rashy neck. You can wish it were not so. I wish it were not so, but it is so. I tire of lost causes. The time of men like me is passing. The time of men like you. He wiped a little blood from under his fingernails. So long past, it might as well have never been.
Beautiful quote, Charles. Thank you for grabbing that one. Yeah. That's one of my favorites, and I think it is such a direct, like a quote that so directly just touches on the themes of Red Country with its changing times, and also mirror. They're a microcosm of the Abercrombie like way of writing, kind of. It's like the story in here where the times are changing and these tailor shops are going to come and the time of magic and stuff is in the past. It's also Abercrombie is moving his world forward toward this more industrial revolution type stuff. And you're going to see magic fade. We've been hearing that since the first trilogy, right?
Right.
Like Baez has been saying the time of magic is kind of moving away here. The spirits that Logan was talking to, they were like fading. All this magic has been going away. And Red Country is this big point where now that's become the themes. And that's a beautiful quote from Casca to Werdener about like, hey, you're done, dude. You're so done. I'm probably done really soon. Like, and it's kind of the way I think about it from the Abercrombie perspective is Abercrombie is like, I'm kind of done with this part of the thing. Like this part where it's about dragons and it's about these moments of, I guess, mysticism and things like that. Abercrombie wants to move toward this more industrial stuff. And Casca, like we've said, is this kind of voice of Abercrombie. I think it's like Abercrombie's cynicism in a lot of ways is what Casca comes through as. And then the Casca death, like we talked about, is this moment of the Casca death at the hands of a writer is this moment of, okay, let's move forward here. That time's done. So it's a beautiful, beautiful quote. And it is to Werdener when they're looking at that dragon.
Right. And it's this idea of holding on to this way of life when the world has already moved past you. You know, it's like you need to face the reality of life. It's like there's so many romantic things about magic and about tradition and things like that, but it's like society is going to creep forward and it is selfish and you have to be able to roll with it. And I believe there's one more Casca quote I want to share that delivers on one of these other themes you were talking about, where he's like, perhaps when you have faced as many disappointments and suffered as many betrayals as I, you will see it. There is no principle beyond the selfish, Inquisitor, and men are animals. Conscience is a burden we choose to bear. Morality is the lie we tell ourselves to make its bearing easier. There have been many times in my life when I have wished it was not so, but it is so. And that weighs extra heavy when you know Casca's story and things like Best Served Cold, where he went through those betrayals with Mons Mercato and things like that, and how heartbroken he was over that. And he's going over it again with Temple, so it's like compounded. And he's also disappointed his fair share of people in his life as well. Yes. So, like,
most of all himself, Charles. Yes. Most of all himself.
So again, I feel like this is the old voice of Abercrombie coming through, heralding the change of the times, but it leaves out the hopeful, which is why Casca gets murdered by a writer at the end. So it's not like, I don't think this is Abercrombie's full belief and the full theme that he's conveying, but I believe it's like, this is what the grimdark side would fully embrace, and now that person's getting killed and we're moving on, right? So it's really interesting to have this come in because it parallels really nicely with like the unstoppable force that is the modern age, destroying all of this beauty and magic in the world for the sake of these boom towns and lawyers' offices and things like that. It's selfish in a way, which is what this quote is getting at, but it's also this idea that we talked about with Lamb all the time. It's like, and like you were saying, Dylan, everyone's the hero of their own story. Conscience is a burden we choose to bear. Morality is the lie we tell ourselves to make its bearing easier. And that to me is like a foundation of grimdark novels, right?
Just moral relativism, I think, is what that would be. Like, it's all subjective. There is no objective morality. Like, this is objectively meaningless, and we have to figure out what to do with that fact. Like, in an objectively meaningless world, how do we find subjective meaning or morality? And that's, Casca has fully embraced that nihilistic view of the world. And Abercrombie, in his writing, at least at this point, does seem to be saying that's not all there is. Maybe there's something more. And we'll miss Casca as a character because, and I think that's part of why he's hard to let go, right? Because it's hard to let that cynicism go because there's like a twisted, beautiful humor and such like. Those quotes, Charles, that you're reading are so poignant and like clever and well written. And for Abercrombie to say goodbye to a character that has that voice, and for us to say goodbye to a character that has that charisma and voice and all this stuff, it's hard. But to move on toward a brighter tomorrow of not being entirely grimdark, Casca had to go with everything he's been through. So it's time, and we'll miss you, Casca. We'll miss you so much. We'll always love you on our rereads. But the world, you are yesterday's man, and the world's ready to move on and toward hopefully a brighter tomorrow.
Yes, exactly. And it's a sign of the ever complexity like developing in Abercrombie's themes too. So I'm super excited for that. There's one last story like plot that I want to make sure we talk about so that we can officially say we've done it all. And that is after Lamb fights Wardenor, right? And Wardenor sacrifices himself to protect Ro from Lamb, which we talked about in our first episode, which we thought was super fascinating. We have the fallout of that. Cantless is hanged, and Savian is revealed to be a rebel and is arrested. And then Shy and the gang leave, and they're like, okay, well, that sucks for him. And then they start to slowly go back and be like, we can't just leave Savian to his fate. And it's Lamb that goes first, I believe, because Lamb can't say no to a good fight. And eventually Shy is like...
That's a savage... Okay, I just want to say, Charles, I know you're doing your thing. You're doing great. I just want to say, because we got a DM on our Insta account that's like, you guys will not give my boy Logan a break. And it's like, we do, I will say at this point, to just say it's all about... I'm just like trying to think about what that listener is going to think of you saying that. So I'm like, to say it's all about that Logan wants to fight and not at all about like some sense of obligation and knowing something to save you. And I think we got to give Logan a teensy. I'm the first one to jump down Logan's throat too, but I'm just thinking about that. The listeners can be hearing that. Like, come on.
Yeah, if you want to listen to like Lamb Love, there's plenty of it out there in the world. I feel like we're addressing this thing that no one's acknowledging, which is like, hey, there's this whole point that Abercrombie's trying to make about Lamb.
Yes,
that
I agree.
That is, I feel like, because it's not explicitly mentioned, although it's never been more explicitly mentioned than in this book, but it kind of, and we love Lamb so much as a character, especially in the First Law Trilogy, that it can be easy to overlook these things. So that's all. And yes, thank you for acknowledging that, Dylan. That's very true.
For sure.
So
we get hard on him, especially because we feel this need to be like, why is no one talking about this? But we do know there's good.
Yes, because Abercrombie is developing the themes of his books. He's getting more and more complex and nuanced and moving more and more away from just textbook grimdark. So we feel obligated to bring up these less popular stories. Like the First Law is like the one that everyone has read, and like it gets exponentially less readers as you go into these books. So it's like this is my first time reading this book as well, even. So it's like, hey, these themes are developing and changing, and a lot has happened with Abercrombie's writing style and themes since the early 2000s when these books were being published. So it's like, it's just fascinating. So yeah, we're a little hard on them, but that's true. Thank you for clarifying.
And then we do the opposite with Jazal. Like, right, we have that Jazal episode way back that was no one knows that Jazal's actually a much more likable person underneath.
I would say
it's
tragic
like that's a complexity
person,
and likable, more likable than the.
Don't derail me. We have to wrap this up.
Let's
we cannot do Red Country dirty. We cannot do Red Country dirty. This whole reason we're back here is to finish Red Country, and we're not talking about Jazal.
I deeply apologize to the listeners and to you, Charles.
Thank you.
I've done it again.
Lamb's a great guy. He had some good reasons for going back, and also this like addiction to violence as well, I think, was too tempting for him. But great character nonetheless. And they have this really fascinating like last stand kind of moment, which I also feel is a great like Western theme, where they're like escaped into this house and Casca's just like shooting stuff into the house, and they're like moving through the rooms trying to just hold out. It's very cinematic. I was like, this would be a great scene in the movie of like things have gone from crazy and they've narrowed down to this last stand moment, and it was just so fun to just watch everything unravel. Casca's getting a bit unraveled as well after like the money was gone. Oh, he still has the money at this point, I think. But it's funny to see Casca like slowly lose his sanity to the point at the end where he's just totally broken. But you get this fun last stand, and Cheyenne Temple decide to come back as well, which is also something you don't normally see in Abercrombie's earlier works of this like 11th hour heroic swoop in save the day thing. So Abercrombie's kind of allowing himself to indulge in some of these moments, I feel like, because now you have this like carriage chase, this 11th hour kind of save. Savian unfortunately dies in the fight, but Lamb is a survivor and manages to escape.
He's always surviving that one.
Yeah, there's this interesting twist that Conthis, is that how you pronounce it, has been posing as a woman named Corlin who is traveling with Savian. So it's like the leader of this rebel group was hidden by one level of
hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, hidden in plain sight.
She was there.
Exactly.
I mean, this character's there the whole time, and I think Abercrombie basically leaned on the portraying it like Conthis was a man, so then no one even considered that it was Corlin, or it didn't even come up for them. But Corlin showed a lot of signs of having leadership qualities, of having a lot of strength and this mental fortitude, while Savian was kind of the muscle. If we really think about it, that's what he was. He'd just go in, and so why we assume that the muscle is supposed to be the person in charge is interesting.
It's an old way of thinking, Dylan. This is not like barbarian fantasy times. This is now an age with lawyers and banks and IP sponsorship deals. Like,
the marketer in you, Charles, is loving that part, and you keep bringing up that stuff. It's like,
well, it's
I really like that there's intellectual property here. You know?
It's just a sign of the times, right? And this is another sign of like, I mean, this was always the case in the First Law. It's like they always put like the brutes as the figureheads of being in charge and had the puppet masters in the back. That's been a theme of it, like up front, like popular state, like showing of power is like a fool's errand in the First Law world. It's like real power is in obscurity, right? Which is a theme that he's had the whole time.
Like the Baez puppet master thing, yeah.
Yeah, because you have
people
Baez,
like to see the pretty puppets.
And you have Calder, right? So you have it a few times throughout all of these moments in First Law, and this is just another example. And I think that's interesting, and there's a lot of truth to it, because, I mean, Savian got the raw end of the deal, right? And then you have Corlin being like, yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for the gold, because the rebels do take the gold.
Yes.
They're like, well, we're obviously going to take this. And then they flee back to Kreese, and then we have that moment with the actor Lestic, which we talked about in our first episode, and the disheveled Casca and Casca's demise, which we also talked about in the first episode, which there's some poetry to that we loved. This idea of being killed by a rider that you had brought up, Dylan, I thought was really fascinating, that I hadn't considered before. But just to say, there was this whole arc with the rebels, and there was this really exciting rising action piece of this last stand with Lamb and Savian that I thought was exciting. And then this carriage chase with Shai and Temple. Temple obviously coming out of this whole thing of Temple being a self-prescribed coward, right? So the fact that he comes back to try and save the day and is like hopping on this carriage, I even think they try and pull off like a maneuver and they fail at it or something, but it's like they somehow manage to hold on and survive. And to see Shai and Temple working together, it was fun and it was exciting. And then you have Dab Sweet coming in with the horses and all that. So it was like all of these moments of excitement that I just thought brought like some of this Western fun into this story. So I think, that's the last piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you bringing those things up, Charles, because it does remind me of this idea that Abercrombie was willing to be a lot more uncynical than usual in his portrayal of a scene like this, just to make it fun, to make it action-packed. Of course, there is some irony to the Savian ends up dying anyway, even though it was kind of to save him and all that stuff. But I guess I feel like not all, but a lot of the battle scenes in Abercrombie's work and in the past were about making some sort of cynical point about battle, or just character-focused, Logan ends up killing people that he loves or something like that, goes by 9 and kills people that he loves. It was always those kind of things, and this feels almost like something that we would get in, I mean, not exactly the same, but something we might get in a John Gwynn's work or Shadow of the Gods type thing, where there's just a fun scene in the middle of this dark world, and Abercrombie showing that he's moving toward more of this. It's okay to just have scenes designed for this kind of fun action-packed thing. He'll still give it his Abercrombie twist, but it was, it just felt like he let it be fun, and not fun in the way that you always describe Abercrombie. Like, this is how Abercrombie has fun, which is like the most twisted moments possible. You'll say that, Charles? It's like, Abercrombie's just having some good old-fashioned fun in these moments, and I appreciate that about Red Country.
Yes. It's like, hey, you can have these moments that are just like action movie fun, right, and still deliver on these themes that you're trying to bring home too. It doesn't belittle the grimdark nature of the story you're trying to tell by having these moments of excitement, So, like, kind of developing both is super fascinating. And that's one of the things I liked most about the story, is watching Abercrombie as an author develop and change, and then the risks he's willing to take in the First Law universe, like his own intellectual property, right? It's like, I'm going to change everything. It's such a bold move, and I admire that with him because it's so easy to be like, oh, the First Law Trilogy is insanely popular. I should write First Law 4 with Logan, like back in action, doing all these cool things.
Yeah.
But he was like, creatively, it's time to move on and like what would really happen with these stories. And I think the standalones did that job of like highlighting new perspectives, recontextualizing what's going on in this First Law world, recontextualizing some of the themes that we've seen, and also introduce this expanded universe of characters and a growing universe as well that's progressing into like a more modern age, which
for sure
it's so admiring. Like I love Wheel of Time as well, but 14 books where not much time passes and the world stays the same is one way to approach it. And Abercrombie's like, well, let's have this world advance like 30 years. I think
the Wheel of Time fans are not going to be happy about that one.
No, I think it's
14
great.
books where the world stays the same.
I would love to see 14 books of Abercrombie like in the First Law world in that time period. I would love to read that. And I'd enjoy reading. I don't think Robert Jordan should change to write an Abercrombie style. Gotcha. I'm just comparing and contrasting the differences. Like when you have a series that you know is popular, you don't then kill off all the characters and make them all really old and like change the world to a totally different genre of fantasy fiction. Right. It's a bold move, but I applaud it, you know.
Yeah. I guess I was trying to placate any Wheel of Time big fans who got to this point in the Red Country episode who might be like, what do you mean, like, 14 books and the world stays the same? Like, all these things happen? And I'm like, you're saying the genre... you're saying, like, genre change, like, going
we don't
from...
like, okay, now Rand is, like, from 80 years old and gray-haired, and, like, we're not in his perspective anymore. We're in the perspective of someone else who thinks he's, like, a shy coward because he's given up violence, you know, when we know him to be a super violent guy, you know, like those kind of things, right? That's not what's happening.
Gotcha.
That
makes
totally
sense, Charles.
That's totally fine. Like I love serial stuff and just getting to know these characters in this world, but that's what makes these creative decisions from Abercrombie to me like stand out. And I feel like an artist should just follow wherever their artistic interests lie. Right. And if he wants to write a Western and then write an industrial era thing, like, that's what I'm willing to read. If he wanted to write 14 books in the First Law Trilogy setting, I'd love to read that too. So there's so much I would love to read about those moments right after the end of Last Argument of Kings. But we're getting these jump forwards instead, which are just as fascinating. So great book. And I agree. I am so excited to get into the Age of Madness. We're gonna do Sharp Ends, and then we're going into Age of Madness.
I'm pumped for both of those, and let's start with Sharp Ends. Charles does a lot of this filling in some moments that we didn't necessarily get to see, but we know happened at some point just by reading all these other books. Right. Like there's a story about Colonel Glockta in his Colonel Glockta days. There's I don't want to give too much away right now.
I haven't read it yet. This is not a spoilers thing. This takes place this was written after Red Country, so you're supposed to read it. But a lot of stuff happens
right in between. It fills in some gaps because there are at least like very deep spoilers for Best Served Cold, I think, in Sharp Ends. And I'm trying to think if there's others. So I do recommend, if any folks are listening to this and they haven't read Sharp Ends, which it does feel like a lot of people skip over Sharp Ends, but it's incredible short stories. And I'll say I highly recommend checking out Sharp Ends at the point that you've already read through the standalones and the original trilogy.
And in terms of publication dates, it comes out after Red Country and before Age of Madness, right? So that's how we're going to read it as well, and I'm super excited to get into that. But for now, Dylan, have we brought redemption to Red Country? Have we said it all? We didn't do anyone dirty, did we?
I don't know. We'll have to leave that to the listeners, and you'll let them know
where
they can.
We'll do a part 3, no problem. We can talk about Abercrombie.
Demand it. If you think there's, but let us know what things you want to hear, because obviously we could talk about Abercrombie forever. You folks have probably realized that. Who knows how many hours of Abercrombie talk we've released at this point? But
probably almost. I'd say around 20. I would say.
Oh, it's got to be way more. I would think.
Probably
20.
6 books, and then we've done like 5 character studies.
profiles, and the episodes are usually longer than
an hour plus. Yeah.
Yeah, and we do a bunch of these two. We did 2 parts for Last Argument of Kings.
Yeah, we did a bunch of 2 parts.
Did we do 2 parts for Best Served Cold too? I think we did.
I think we did. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we did like the First Law character matchup. I'm just saying, it's been a lot of Abercrombie talk, and we still.
Yeah.
So if you really want. Just let us know. Let us
know
what things you actually want.
Because we could talk about forever. We knew we were rushing through Red Country on the first one, but it's we talked about Lamb, Shy, Casca, so we hit the heavy hitters. But there's all these other beautiful moments that we now got to explore in depth. So I'm super happy that we did it, and I'm super excited for you guys to listen to it. And it sets the stage nicely for Sharp Ends, which we will be reading very soon.
Yes. Comment on the Twitter episode announcement that we post.
That's a great way to hit us
that's a good, right.
At the FTF Podcast 1.
Where at the FTF Podcast 1, I always post an episode announcement the day of our episode releases. Mm-hmm. And there's one, you could do it at the FTF Podcast at Instagram as well. I feel like that's a good thing. Have them comment on those posts, which is like a centralized location for them to say the things they want from
in relation to that specific episode.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah.
Because
they did it. I guess they were starting to do it anyway. So I'm like, oh, that's really smart.
Right, it is smart. That. And now that we're starting to get into the plug area of the end of the show here, is there anything we want to say about Red Country before we play that outro music and finish all that good old plugging stuff?
It's my favorite of the standalones. I'm sorry that the rest of the community doesn't feel as strongly, but they're all great, and everyone's entitled to their own.
It's a great book. I don't think it's my favorite, but it's great.
I like the hopefulness. Me too. I like that. Just it feels so earned after reading the 5 books of more straightforward grimdark. It's gotten less grimdark with basically every. I think, or it just this feels like a turning point.
It's definitely a turning point for sure, and that's a great reason to signal it. I think I think the heroes to me is a good balance of what I love about the First Law Trilogy and where Abercrombie's trying to go, and it was exciting and contained. I feel like Red Country, as progressive as it was a lot more, and then also we were. Cutting way forwards, and there's a lot of these frontier moments and things. So it's I get it. And it may just be because we've read 6 books in a row. I'm getting progressively more on the burnt out end of things. Right. But it was a fantastic book nonetheless. But I can see why it's not a crowd favorite. And people don't want to see Logan that way. People want to see Logan as First Law.
Yeah. People do. There are folks who I've seen comment things about this was the final straw for me with Logan, and I really wanted him to get redemption, and I feel like he didn't, or they think
was like that the whole time.
He did, and that's kind of my Well, I agree, but everyone's entitled. Comment if you disagree. You're welcome to comment on that episode announcement post. So, I love Red Country. I mean, you can't go wrong. It's pick your favorite flavor of ice cream, and they're all going to be delicious. If that kind of thing between the 3 standalones. Are you a military fantasy person? Then the heroes. Are you a revenge story Kill Bill fan? Then Best Served Cold. And if you're a Western person, which maybe I am, everyone Ed Gwynn keeps telling me to read Lonesome Dove, and I will. So did I mention on the podcast? A doctor also told. I think I mentioned when we were talking. I
think so.
Gwynn. I was I had a doctor tell me to also read Lonesome Dove, which is a big inspiration.
You did mention it on the episode we had them on, which came out a few weeks ago. Guys, check that out.
Yeah. Lonesome Dove, if you love Red Country, is apparently a Western that Abercrombie's very inspired by. So. I haven't read it, but Ed Gwynn keeps telling me to read it, and that is, I take his word much more seriously than mine. So it's, great rec, I bet, and I can't wait to check that out. Okay, I'm done talking, Charles. You
great. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and get that outro music going, guys.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, guys, reach out to us on Twitter over at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end, and Instagram at the FTF Podcast. And as we were mentioning, guys, those episode announcements are a great place to leave feedback. We're very active there, and we always try and respond and react to everyone that comments on those. So that's a great place for discourse. Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even further than following us on social media and interacting with our posts, what else can they do? And they're listening on Apple Podcasts also. Did I mention that?
Yes, you must. Yeah. Toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just find that Friends Talking Fantasy page on the Apple Podcast app. Click the Friends Talking Fantasy page and scroll down past all those episodes until you start seeing stars. Once you're seeing stars, the optimal number of stars to click in order to support the show would be 5 of them. If you got a little bit of extra time, then writing a review is even more helpful for a podcast like ours. And I feel like I go through the motions sometimes. It's like we super duper appreciate those. Like if you write a review, I will read it. I'll be super happy. I will be like, yes, this is awesome. Thank you so much. That's like a big thing. So but just listening more than enough. We're super grateful.
Just listening, that is huge as well, guys. Thank you so much for listening to us. Finally do good by the rest of Red Country. Really appreciate you listening, and as always, go forth and conquer, friends.